Hello, welcome back and thank you for watching Betrayed Husbands Club. We appreciate each and every one of you. We'd like to know, what part of the world are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Colonel James Mitchell had envisioned this moment countless times during his 15-month deployment in Afghanistan. In his thoughts, he would drive up to the house, and Catherine would rush out, tears of joy streaming down her face to meet him. His teenage daughter would follow, and they'd all embrace, finally whole again. But in his line of work, dreams rarely aligned with reality. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the familiar streets of his suburban neighborhood as he turned his truck around the last corner. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white with anticipation. 15 months of combat, 3 men lost under his command, and endless close calls had taken their toll on him. He knew that. The real question was whether home had changed as much as he had. James pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, sitting quietly for a moment. The 2-story colonial house stood still, its windows reflecting the dying light of the day. The American flag he had hung before leaving still fluttered by the front door, though it had begun to fade. Catherine had promised to replace it if it wore out, but either she hadn't noticed or didn't mind. Either way, it brought a frown to his weathered face. The last few months of communication had been different. The video calls had become shorter, less frequent. Catherine blamed it on a major merger at her firm, saying the longer hours and extra responsibilities had taken over. Their 20th anniversary had passed with just a brief phone call. She'd been in a meeting, she said. Couldn't talk long. Stop it, he muttered to himself, shaking off the doubts. Combat made you paranoid. He knew that all too well. 20 years of marriage deserved better trust than that. James grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The neighborhood was quiet, almost unnervingly so, after months of living with the constant hum of a forward operating base. No distant explosions, no helicopters overhead, no radio chatter. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of a lawnmower a few blocks away. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early. The official discharge wasn't for another 2 weeks, but his replacement had arrived earlier than expected, and his commanding officer had given the green light for him to leave early. He thought about calling ahead, but decided on a surprise instead. Catherine would be home from work by now, and his daughter would be back from school. The familiar weight of his combat boots against the concrete driveway grounded him as he approached the house. Everything looked exactly the same as he remembered. Catherine's beloved rosebush was still carefully tended to, and the basketball hoop over the garage still lacked its net. His daughter had been working on her shots before he left, determined to make varsity. Had she made it? The thought struck him with a pang. He had no idea. James reached for his keys, the familiar set feeling strange after so long. He'd carried them throughout the deployment, as a physical reminder of the home waiting for him. The house key was smooth from years of use, its brass surface catching fragments of sunlight. But as he looked up to put the key in the lock, something caught his eye and sent a chill through him. Through the garage's side window, he could see a sleek black Mercedes-Benz parked inside. His steps faltered, and military instincts kicked in as he processed the scene. Catherine's Honda was parked next to it. He recognized the dent in the rear bumper from a small accident last year. But that Mercedes, he knew that car. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. At last year's company Christmas party, Catherine had introduced him to her boss, Robert Maxwell. The man had spent the entire evening talking about his new car, a custom Mercedes-Benz that had cost more than James made in 2 years. No, he whispered, his voice rough with a sudden, sinking realization. The late nights, the missed calls, the distracted conversations. No, no, no. James moved closer to the garage window, his training taking over as he analyzed the scene. Both cars were empty, and the house was eerily quiet, though faint music drifted from an upstairs window. His and Catherine's window. His hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a rage so intense it threatened to consume him. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of deployments, missing birthdays and anniversaries, putting his life on the line, while he gripped the toolbox in his truck, his movements automatic. His muscles acted without thinking, while his mind spun with violent thoughts. The cold metal bolts felt heavy in his hand as he grabbed a handful, enough to cause serious damage. He'd used similar bolts to fix equipment in the field, but now they had a different purpose. The garage door opener felt like a detonator in his palm as he pressed it. The door rose slowly, agonizingly, each inch revealing more of the Mercedes' flawless black surface. James approached the car with the same caution he would have if he suspected an IED. He moved carefully, methodically, fully aware of the destruction he was about to unleash. The hood release was easy to find. He had picked up a bit about luxury cars during his brief time as a mechanic before joining the military. The hood popped open with a soft click that seemed to resonate in the quiet space. The engine was a masterpiece of German engineering. James held the first bolt over it, hovering between action and consequence when a memory flashed in his mind. Robert Maxwell at the Christmas party, one arm draped possessively over the hood of the car. "You see, Colonel," he had said, his voice dripping with condescension, "when you invest in quality it shows." The same way he looked at Catherine all night, that possessive gleam in his eyes. James let the first bolt fall. It hit something deep inside the engine with a satisfying ping. Then another. And another. Each bolt felt like justice, a small measure of revenge for the pain that was now burning through his chest. He didn't allow himself to smile. This wasn't about pleasure. It was about consequences. The last bolt fell just as the music upstairs shifted to something slower, more intimate. James closed the hood gently, unwilling to alert them, not yet. The garage door closed behind him as he walked toward the side entrance, his mind already calculating his next moves. The gun safe in his study, the Magnum inside, the stairs leading up to his bedroom, their bedroom. James slid his key into the side door, the metallic scrape of the tumblers falling into place sounding like the bolt of a rifle being drawn back. The war he'd left behind in Afghanistan was over. But a new one was about to begin. The side door opened silently into the kitchen. James had always kept the hinges well-oiled, a habit he'd picked up during his first deployment when Catherine had complained about the squeaking waking their daughter. The familiar scent of home hit him like a physical blow, lavender air freshener, the faint smell of coffee from this morning's brew, and underneath it all, Catherine's perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance he had given her on their 15th anniversary. James moved through the kitchen with the practiced precision of a combat veteran, his boots barely making a sound on the tile floor. Everything looked exactly as it had 3 days ago during their last video call, dishes drying in the rack, his daughter's physics textbook on the counter, Catherine's coffee mug left in the sink. The normalcy of it all made his stomach turn. How many mornings had Maxwell sat at this very kitchen island, drinking coffee from James' mugs, plotting to take his life? The hallway stretched before him, leading past the living room and toward his study. Family photos lined the walls. Their wedding day, his daughter's first day of school, Catherine's graduation from accounting school. He had paid for that degree with combat pay from Iraq, proud to help his wife chase her dreams. Now, those dreams included destroying everything they had built together. His study door was closed, just as he'd left it 15 months ago. The room had always been his refuge, a place where he could unwind after difficult missions or handle battalion paperwork. Catherine rarely entered it. She always said the military memorabilia made her uncomfortable. But now, he wondered if it was guilt, not discomfort, that had kept her away. The key to the study was on his main key ring, smaller than the others. The lock turned with a soft click, and James slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The room smelled of leather and gun oil. He had taught his daughter how to properly maintain weapons before deploying, making her promise to clean his collection every month. By the spotless condition of the display cases, she had kept that promise. His gun safe stood in the corner, a solid piece of American steel that had cost him a month's salary. The combination came to him instinctively. 0-7-1-5, their wedding date. The irony of using that number now made his jaw tighten. The mechanism released with a heavy thunk, and the door swung open to reveal his personal arsenal. The Magnum rested in its custom foam cradle, gleaming softly under the study's dim light. James lifted it with the familiarity of years of use, checking the chamber out of habit. His daughter had kept this weapon in pristine condition. The barrel was spotless, the action smooth. He had bought it after his third deployment, telling Catherine it was for home protection. In 15 years, he had never imagined using it against a threat from within. The weight of the loaded weapon centered him as his military training kicked in. 6 rounds in the cylinder, more than enough. The sharp scent of gun oil filled his nostrils as he checked the sights. Muscle memory from countless hours at the range guided his movements. This weapon had been his insurance, his guarantee that he could protect his family from any danger. But how do you protect your family when the threat comes from the person you trusted most? James moved back into a hallway, the Magnum held low against his thigh, adopting the proper posture for room clearing. The sounds from upstairs became more distinct, soft music, occasional laughter, the creak of bedsprings that James refused to dwell on. Each sound felt like a nail in the coffin of his marriage. Every moment was another betrayal, stoking the fire of his rage. The stairs stretched ahead, 15 steps between him and the destruction of everything he had believed in. His military training screamed at him to stay sharp, to maintain awareness. But another voice, darker and more primal, urged him to charge up those stairs and unleash the 20 years of violence that had been building up inside him. His boot hit the first step, the old wood groaning softly under his weight. The sound took him back to Afghanistan, to midnight raids and compound clearances. But this wasn't a Taliban stronghold. This was his home. And the enemy wasn't some faceless insurgent. It was the woman who had promised to love him, for better or worse, until death parted them. Second step. Third step. Each one bringing him closer to a confrontation that could end in blood, broken lives, or both. His finger rested just beside the trigger guard, the proper trigger discipline ingrained in him after years of training. Even now, with rage coursing through his veins like napalm, those instincts held steady. Fourth step. Fifth step. The music upstairs shifted to something slower, more intimate. His grip tightened on the Magnum, knuckles white with controlled fury. The tactical part of his mind catalogued his advantages: surprise, the high ground, combat experience. The husband part of his mind catalogued betrayals, missed calls, hollow excuses, fading intimacy. Sixth step. Seventh step. A movement caught his eye in his peripheral vision, a shadow passing through the living room below. James froze, every muscle locking into combat readiness. Another shadow, smaller this time, moved purposefully toward the stairs. Then a floorboard creaked behind him. "Dad!" His daughter's voice froze him in place, thick with emotion but steady as if she had seen enough trauma to steel herself. James turned slowly, the Magnum still held low, and found her standing at the base of the stairs. At 16, she was the spitting image of Catherine at that age, but her eyes were all his. And right now, they held a darkness he recognized from his own reflection. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of untold secrets. "Don't go up there. Not yet. Move aside," James ordered, his voice barely recognizable to him. The rage that had driven him up the stairs warred with his instinct to protect her from whatever was happening above. She shook her head, stepping closer. In the dim hallway light, he could see tears threatening to spill from her eyes, but her jaw was set with determination. "No. You need to listen to me first. I know what's happening up there. I've known for months." The words hit him like physical blows, each one knocking the wind out of him. Months. The Magnum trembled in his hand as the weight of her words sank in. She had been carrying this burden on her own, while he had been halfway across the world. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking slightly but steadying with visible effort. "And I have a plan. A better plan than whatever you're thinking about doing right now. One that will destroy him completely." James's grip on the Magnum tightened as another laugh floated down from upstairs. You're 16. You don't understand what's going on here. I understand perfectly. She cut him off, her voice hardening to match his own. I understand that if you go up there right now, you'll end up in prison. And then what happens to me? Her eyes, so much like his, bore into him. I'll be stuck with them. Is that what you want? The tactical logic of her words pierced through the red haze of his rage. He had seen too many good soldiers throw their lives away in moments of passion. But this was different. This was his home. His wife. Let me show you what I've gathered. She pressed, sensing his hesitation. Please, Dad. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. After that, if you still want to go up there. She let the sentence hang, heavy with meaning. The gun trembled in his grip as he stared at his daughter. The sounds from upstairs grew more distinct. Another laugh, the creak of bed springs, the soft murmur of voices. His finger twitched toward the trigger. Dad? Her voice cracked again, real fear slipping through the controlled facade. Please trust me. Something in her tone broke through the fog of his rage. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just his little girl, but a young woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. She had been dealing with all of this alone, carrying the burden of knowledge while he was thousands of miles away, fighting someone else's war, while her own world was crumbling. 5 minutes. He growled in frustration. Lowering the gun to his side, he saw the relief flood her features, but she didn't waste a moment celebrating. My room. I'll show you everything. James followed her down the hall, each step away from the stairs feeling like a monumental effort. Her room looked exactly like it had during their video calls, pale blue walls covered in band posters, her desk cluttered with schoolwork and college brochures. But she went straight to the closet, pushing aside hanging clothes to reveal a laptop connected to an external hard drive. I started documenting everything 3 months ago, she said, her voice taking on a clinical tone, though her hands trembled slightly. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Mom was working late more and more, always with him. Then I started noticing little things, new jewelry she couldn't explain, secret phone calls, text messages she'd delete the second she read them. She opened the laptop and began typing rapidly. The screen cast a soft blue glow on her face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. How many nights had she stayed up, collecting evidence while pretending everything was fine? I installed tracking software on her phone when she was sleeping, she continued, pulling up files with practiced ease. I recorded their conversations when they thought I wasn't home. But it's more than just the affair, Dad. James leaned forward, staring at the screen as she opened file after file, dozens of them. Audio recordings, text message logs, photos taken through car windows showing Catherine and Robert at various restaurants and hotels. His daughter had created a surveillance dossier that would have impressed his intelligence officers. This is from last week, she said, clicking on an audio file. Catherine's voice filled the room, followed by Robert's deeper tones. They were talking about money, large sums of it, being moved between accounts that shouldn't even exist. They're embezzling, she explained, her voice hardening. I've got proof of that too. Bank statements, emails, everything. He's been stealing from the company for months, and Mom's helping him cover it up. She pulled up spreadsheets filled with numbers, telling the story of systematic theft. They're planning to take the money and run. Start a new life somewhere else. James sank into her desk chair, the magnum heavy in his lap. The betrayal he had discovered upstairs suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the depths his daughter was revealing. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy, one that threatened to destroy not only his marriage, but potentially dozens of lives affected by the theft. Why didn't you tell me sooner? His voice was rough with emotion. She met his gaze steadily. Because I needed more evidence. And because I knew what you'd do if I told you while you were deployed. You would have come home guns blazing, and they would have covered their tracks. She gestured at the screen. This way, we have everything we need to destroy them both. Legally. Completely. No prison time for you. No mercy for them. James's mind raced. What exactly are you proposing? A cold smile crossed her face, an expression no 16-year-old should know how to make. First, we keep collecting evidence. Every meeting, every phone call, every penny they steal. When we have enough, we don't just expose the affair. We expose everything. To the company board, to the police, to their families. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, despite the music still playing upstairs. We take everything from them, Dad. Just like they tried to take everything from us. James stared at his daughter, seeing shadows of himself and her calculated rage. The soldier in him recognized a well-planned operation when he saw one. The father in him grieved that she had been forced to become so tactical at such a young age. But there was also pride in her strength, her intelligence, her refusal to be a victim. The sounds from upstairs continued, oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding below. James's finger traced the trigger guard of the Magnum as he weighed his options. The immediate satisfaction of action versus the total destruction his daughter was proposing. How long? He asked finally. A month, maybe 2, she replied. I'm close to accessing their private email accounts. Once I have those. She trailed off as footsteps creaked overhead. They can't know you're home yet. We need them to feel safe, keep making mistakes. James stood, his military instincts taking over as he quickly assessed the tactical situation. I'll get a hotel room and keep monitoring them. But I want daily reports, he added, his tone firm. And if anything changes, I'll call you immediately. I will, she promised. And Dad, thank you for trusting me. He pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling her trembling against him. For a brief moment, she wasn't the strategic mastermind who had just outlined a plan for destruction. She was just his little girl, hurt and angry, trying to protect whatever was left of their family. I'm here now, he whispered into her hair. We'll make them pay together. She nodded against his chest, then pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. You should go. They usually finish around 6, and Mom will be starting dinner soon. James holstered the Magnum. His rage had transformed into something colder, more focused. He looked at his daughter, this warrior he'd somehow raised, and saw the next few weeks stretch out before them like a campaign map. Territory to conquer, enemies to defeat. A war to be won, not with bullets, but with patience and precision. I'm proud of you, he said softly. Not for what you had to do, but for how you handled it. She gave him a sad smile. I learned from the best, Dad. Now go. I'll call you tonight with an update. James slipped out of the house as quietly as he had entered. The weight of betrayal was heavy on his shoulders, but it was matched only by the pride he felt for his daughter's strength. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the house that no longer felt like home. The Mercedes was still in the garage, its engine compartment now bearing the mark of his first act of revenge. But that was just the beginning. The war was about to start, and this time, he had the perfect ally. The bland decor of the Hampton Inn matched James's mood as he spread surveillance photos across the queen-size bed. 3 days had passed since his failed homecoming, and each image told a story of betrayal that made his jaw tighten. His daughter's evidence-gathering skills had not been exaggerated. The hotel room phone rang, breaking his concentration. Their agreed-upon signal, 2 rings, a hang-up, then a return call. He waited, counting the seconds until it rang again. Secure, he answered, falling back on military protocol. Clear, his daughter's voice came through. Mom just left for dinner just happened to pick her up. James checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. Tell me. They're getting sloppy, she said, the sound of typing punctuating her words. Maxwell didn't even park around the corner this time. Pulled right into the driveway like he owned the place. A pause. Which, according to these emails I just accessed, he might be planning to do, literally. Explain. Mom's been looking at real estate listings. High-end properties in the Cayman Islands. And get this, she's been doing it from her work computer, logging in through Maxwell's credentials. James moved to his laptop, opening the secure email account they'd set up. Send me everything. Already did. Check attachment 3. It's their correspondence with an offshore bank. They've been moving company funds through a shell corporation. More typing. Maxwell's getting desperate. The quarterly audit's coming up, and there's a lot of money he can't explain. How much are we talking about? At least 4 million, maybe more. I'm still decrypting some of their communications, she said, but then she paused. Hold on. Something's happening. James straightened, instantly alert. Talk to me. Maxwell's wife just pulled up next door. She's heading for our house. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She looks pissed. Can you get audio? Better, she replied. I installed a camera in the portico last week. Sending you the live feed now. James's laptop pinged with a new notification. The video quality was impressive. His daughter hadn't skimped on the equipment. Maxwell's wife, Patricia, stood at the front door, her posture rigid, radiating a fury that could only come from the upper class. The door opened, revealing Catherine in casual clothes, her surprise clear on her face. Patricia. I wasn't expecting. Save it. Patricia's voice cut through, firm and cold. We need to talk about these. She thrust a manila envelope forward. Catherine took it, her hands visibly trembling as she pulled out several photographs. Oh my God! His daughter whispered over the phone. Those are the ones I sent her yesterday. James felt a rush of pride mixed with concern. You didn't tell me about that. Tactical surprise, she replied. I knew she'd confront Mom directly. Her social media's full of posts about confronting problems head-on. But watch this part. On screen, Catherine stammered, trying to deny the photos. These aren't. I mean, they could be anyone. They're dated, Catherine. Patricia's voice was sharp, unyielding. And time-stamped. You and my husband at the Gateway Hotel. The Riverside Restaurant. Our vacation home in Aspen. Patricia's voice could have frozen hell. I especially enjoyed the one showing you entering our house when I was at my mother's funeral. James's free hand clenched into a fist. He hadn't known about that particular betrayal. I can explain. Catherine began, but Patricia cut her off. No need. Robert already did. Quite thoroughly, after I showed him copies. Patricia smiled, cold and calculated. He claims you've been stalking him. That you're obsessed. Unstable. He's filing a restraining order. He's what? Catherine's composure shattered, her voice cracking. But we've been planning. She faltered. Planning what, exactly? Patricia leaned in, her voice low and lethal. Because my lawyer would love to hear about any plans you and my husband have been making. On the phone, his daughter let out a low whistle. Maxwell threw her under the bus. Just like I predicted. You knew he would do this? Men like him always save themselves first. That's why I sent the photos to Patricia instead of the board. She'll do our work for us, digging into every aspect of his life, including the finances. James watched as Catherine crumpled under Patricia's relentless questioning. Every denial buried her deeper. Every explanation revealed another lie. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. And his daughter had orchestrated it perfectly. There's more, she said as the confrontation on-screen came to an end. While Mom's distracted, I'm copying her entire hard drive. The program just found something interesting in her deleted files. Want to hear about the fake passports they ordered? James settled into his chair, eyes locked on the feed where Patricia was delivering what appeared to be a final, devastating blow to Catherine's composure. Tell me everything. Start with the passports. Better idea. I'll bring the files to you. Mom will be a mess after this. Probably call Maxwell. Which means I've got at least 2 hours before she remembers I exist. He could hear the keys jangling in the background. Meet me at that diner you liked? The one with the good pie. James checked his weapon out of habit. 20 minutes. And daughter? Yeah? Good work on this. Your timing was perfect. He could hear the smile in her voice. I learned from the best, remember? See you soon. The call ended, and James took one last look at the video feed. Catherine had collapsed onto the porch swing, head in her hands, while Patricia's BMW purred away into the growing darkness. It should have given him satisfaction to see his wife's carefully crafted lies beginning to unravel. Instead, he felt only a cold, tactical certainty. This was just the first domino. The real devastation was still on the horizon. James grabbed his jacket and keys, the weight of the Magnum under his arm a harsh reminder of how much worse this could have turned out. His daughter's way was better. Death was too quick, too merciful. Catherine and Maxwell would have to live through the destruction of everything they'd built together. Piece by piece, the war was escalating, and they didn't even know they were under attack. Lou's diner hadn't changed in 15 months. The same neon sign buzzed in the window, the familiar scent of coffee and apple pie filling the air. The vinyl booths creaked as James slid into his usual corner spot. He always chose the seat facing the door, a habit that gave him a clear view of all the entries and exits. The waitress recognized him immediately. "Colonel, you're back." "Evening, Rita," he said with a thin smile. "Coffee black. And a slice of apple pie." She was already reaching for her pen. "2 slices?" he corrected, expecting company. Rita's eyes sparkled. "Your girl coming by?" "Haven't seen her in here for months." "Not since..." Rita trailed off, suddenly unsure. "Not since Catherine started telling people I requested a divorce while I was overseas." James finished for her, his voice even. The lie had clearly spread throughout the community. Rita's expression shifted, darkening. "Never believed that for a minute. You two always seemed, well, like a team." She stopped as the diner bell chimed. "Well, look who it is." His daughter entered, laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She changed out of her house clothes into jeans and a dark hoodie, and her eyes automatically scanned the diner, a habit she picked up from him, before heading to their booth. "Hi, Rita." She smiled warmly. "How's Tommy doing at college?" "Dean's List again." Rita grinned proudly. "Those math tutorials you gave him really paid off." Rita headed off to get their coffee. "Leaving them alone? Making friends with the locals?" James asked quietly. His daughter pulled out her laptop. "Information comes from everywhere, Dad. Rita's son works part-time at Maxwell's country club. The things he overhears at the caddy shack." She smiled slyly. "Let's just say golf brings out people's true colors." The laptop booted up as Rita returned with their coffee and pie. Once she was safely out of earshot, they picked up where they'd left off. "Show me what you found," James said, sipping the bitter coffee. His daughter turned the screen toward him. These were buried deep in Mom's deleted files. Passport applications, but not the usual kind. She pulled up several documents. "Look at the names," she said. James studied the forms. Catherine Maxwell, Robert, and Catherine Maxwell. These were dated 3 weeks ago. They're planning to leave the country as husband and wife. She opened another document. "And check this. Bank accounts in both names, already set up in Grand Cayman." "They've been planning this for months?" James asked, leaning forward. "Yep. Some of the money's already there." "Some of it?" "Yeah, they've been moving it in smaller chunks to avoid detection. But here's where it gets interesting." She opened a spreadsheet. "These transfers don't match the company books. Maxwell's been stealing way more than we thought." James leaned in, eyes narrowing as he studied the numbers. "How much more?" "Close to 12 million, according to this. He's been cooking the books for years, long before Mom got involved. But he needed her help to move the bigger amounts," she said, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of pie. "That's probably how it started. He needed an accounting expert, someone who could help hide the money, and found a willing accomplice." James's jaw tightened. "What's our next move?" She pulled out a USB drive. "Remember that backup I made of Mom's computer?" his daughter asked. "I found something else, emails between them, talking about the company's server security. Specifically, the gaps in it." A cold smile spread across her face. "Maxwell's been logging in remotely, accessing restricted files. But he's not as tech-savvy as he thinks. Every login leaves a trace. You can track them? James asked, leaning in. Better, she replied. I can replicate them. Make it look like he's been accessing accounts he shouldn't be. Downloading files above his clearance level. She lowered her voice. The company handles sensitive financial data for some major clients. The kind who get really upset about security breaches. James watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. The skills she had developed would impress even his military intelligence officers. But the cost of her innocence troubled him. You're sure this can't be traced back to you? Positive. I'm bouncing everything through Maxwell's own credentials. As far as the system knows, he's just getting sloppy with his late-night logins. She took another bite of pie. Besides, after Patricia's visit tonight, security's already going to be looking at him sideways. Speaking of Patricia, James set his coffee down. That was a risk, sending her those photos? A calculated one, she said, grinning. Maxwell's predictable. He always sacrifices others to save himself. By throwing Mom under the bus, he's just proved to Patricia that the photos are real. James raised an eyebrow. And guess who sits on the company's audit committee? Patricia? He asked. Chair of the committee. Has been for 3 years. Mom didn't know that Maxwell kept their work lives separate. But now... She closed the laptop. Now, Patricia's going to tear through every financial document with a fine-toothed comb. And she has the authority to do it. James nodded slowly. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Her expression sobered. Almost everything. There's one wild card we need to discuss, she said, pulling out her phone. She showed him a text message. Mom's trying to reach you. Wants to explain before you hear things from other people. James felt his jaw tighten. She knows I'm back? Not yet, she said. This is preemptive damage control. After Patricia's visit, she's scared. Probably thinks the photos will get around town. His daughter studied him carefully. What do you want to do? James stared at his empty coffee cup, considering their options. Can you get into her phone? Read her messages with Maxwell? Already done, she replied. He's barely responding to her. Told her to stop contacting him until things cooled down. She scoffed. He's trying to create distance, make her look like the aggressor. Classic abuser tactic. And the passports? James asked. Still in process. Takes time to create that kind of documentation, even through illegal channels. She hesitated. Dad. When the time comes, what exactly are we going to do with all this evidence? James looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. Behind the tactical brilliance and cold calculation, he could still see the little girl who used to run to him for protection. Now she was protecting him, in her own way. We're going to destroy them, he said quietly. Not just their reputations or their freedom. Everything. The money, the relationships, the backup plans. By the time we're done, they won't have a single refuge left. His daughter nodded slowly. And Mom? She asked. When she tries to contact you? James gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Let her stew for now. The more desperate she gets, the more mistakes she'll make. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You've done good work, but I need you to be careful. These people are cornered animals now. They're going to get dangerous, she said with a calm certainty. I know, James replied. That's why I installed new locks on my bedroom door. And? She reached into her bag and pulled out a small canister. Bought this today. Just in case. James immediately recognized the pepper spray. It was a symbol of another piece of innocence lost. Show me how you hold it, he said, his tone shifting as he moved into instructor mode. If she was going to be prepared, he would make sure she was as ready as possible. They spent the next hour running through basic self-defense techniques, speaking in low tones as the diner slowly emptied out. James taught her everything he'd taught his soldiers. How to stay aware of your surroundings, how to recognize threats, how to escape dangerous situations. She absorbed each lesson with the same fierce focus she brought to her surveillance work. As Rita began stacking chairs on the tables, they gathered their things to leave. Out in the parking lot, his daughter paused by her car, clearly thinking something over. "Dad, thanks for trusting me with all this," she said quietly. "I know it's not the way you wanted to handle things." James pulled her into a tight hug, his voice full of sincerity. "You've made me proud. Not for what you had to do, but for how well you've done it." He pulled back, locking eyes with her. "But remember, you're still my daughter first, operative second. If anything feels off, or if you're unsure, you call me." No hesitation. "Clear?" "Crystal." She offered him a small, grateful smile. "I'll send you the server access data tonight. Watch your secure email." As she drove off, James stood in the parking lot until the last of her taillights disappeared around the corner. Then he pulled out his phone, his eyes landing on Catherine's message again. 3 attempts to contact him in the past hour. He deleted them all unread. Let her worry. Let her fear. Let her wonder how and when her perfectly crafted world would come crashing down. The confrontation would come soon enough, but for now, they had to set the trap. A week later, James sat in his hotel room, monitoring several laptop screens, each showing a different feed. His daughter's surveillance network had grown impressive, practically flawless. The main screen showed Maxwell's office, where the man himself appeared to be in the middle of a heated phone conversation. His daughter's voice crackled through his earpiece. "You getting this?" "Crystal clear," James replied, adjusting the volume. What triggered him? Patricia just called an emergency board meeting. Apparently, she's found some major irregularities in the quarterly audit. He could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Maxwell's trying to reach Mom, but she's not answering." "Where is she?" "Having a breakdown in her office." "Hold on, let me switch your feed." The screen flickered and then showed Catherine's office. She sat hunched over at her desk, her makeup smeared from crying, staring blankly at her phone. Papers were scattered all around her, the chaos a stark contrast to her usual meticulousness. Her computer screen flashed with multiple warnings about unauthorized access attempts. The IT department locked her out an hour ago. His daughter explained. Standard procedure when they suspect an account compromise. But with her credentials flagged, they're going to start reviewing every file she's touched in the last year. How many offshore transfers will that expose? All of them, she said with a knowing tone. I made sure the audit trail is clear and unambiguous. A beat passed before she spoke again, her voice low with satisfaction. Oh, this is good. Maxwell's secretary just walked in with security. They're escorting him out of the building? James switched the feed to Maxwell's walk of shame. The man, normally so confident, now appeared flustered, panic in his eyes. Security flanked him closely as employees peeked out of their offices, clearly watching the spectacle. Dad? His daughter's voice had a hint of concern. We've got movement at the house. Maxwell's heading there. You're clear. Is Mom still at the office? Yeah, she's still there. He heard the clack of keys in the background. But Maxwell looks pretty unstable. Should I call the police? James, already in motion, checked his magnum with a practiced hand. No. I'll handle this. Keep monitoring and record everything. Be careful, she warned. He's been drinking. I can see the bottles in his car. Even better, James muttered, heading to his truck. A drunk man makes mistakes. Keep your channel open. The drive to Maxwell's house took 12 minutes. He parked a block away, approaching on foot just as Maxwell's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. The man stumbled out, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. Catherine! Maxwell shouted, pounding on the front door. I know you did this. You and your little bitch of a daughter. James felt his trigger finger twitch, but he held his position. Evidence first, revenge second. You ruined everything! Maxwell continued to shout, pulling out his phone. Pick up, damn you! You think you can destroy me? he slurred, voice filled with venom. I'll show you destruction. James's earpiece crackled to life. Dad, he's forwarding emails to himself. Talk to me. James responded immediately. Looks like oh shit. Her voice turned grim. He's sending proof that Mom was behind the embezzlement. Setting her up to take all the blame. He's going to try to pin everything on her. She continued, her voice hardening. James watched Maxwell pace back and forth in front of the door, still shouting into his phone. Perfect. Let him dig himself deeper. You getting all this? James asked. Every word, his daughter confirmed. And yes, he just logged into the company's server from his phone, using Mom's stolen credentials. IT will have a record of that. Maxwell turned back toward the door, this time with a bottle in his hand. You want to play games? He slurred, holding up the bottle. I've got records of Catherine. Every transfer, every meeting, every time you spread your legs to earn your share. The bottle smashed against the door, the glass scattering across the porch. James had seen enough. Time to introduce himself to his wife's lover. He moved silently, his combat boots making no sound on the grass. Maxwell didn't hear him approach until it was too late. Problems with the door, Robert? Maxwell spun, nearly falling. His eyes widened when he recognized James. Colonel? You're not due back. Change of plans? James kept his voice casual, stepping forward to block Maxwell's escape route. Thought I'd surprise my wife. Seems I'm not the only one with surprises. Listen. Maxwell raised his hands, backing away. Whatever Catherine told you, she's lying. She's been unstable, obsessed. These accusations she's making. You mean the ones you just screamed across my front lawn? James moved closer. The part about her spreading her legs? Or the part about the transfers? Maxwell's back hit the car. I can explain. To who? The board? The police? James smiled coldly. Your wife? My wife? Maxwell's face went pale. What does Patricia have to do with this? James leaned in, his voice low and sharp. She's very thorough, isn't she? Especially when she's angry. James was close enough now to smell the alcohol on Maxwell's breath. Did you really think those photos appeared out of nowhere? Understanding dawned in Maxwell's bloodshot eyes. You've been watching? Planning? Learning all your dirty little secrets. James stepped closer, eyes cold. Welcome to war, Robert. You're not very good at it. Maxwell's face twisted with drunken courage. You think you can threaten me? I'm Robert Maxwell. I've got money, connections. Not anymore. James's voice was icy, unwavering. Check your accounts. Maxwell fumbled for his phone, hands shaking as he pulled up his banking app. His face shifted through shades of red, white, and green as he scrolled. That's impossible. These accounts were secure. Hidden. Not from people who know where to look, James replied, straightening up. You should go home, Robert. Patricia's waiting. Something about divorce papers and a forensic accountant. You son of a... Maxwell swung wildly. The punch telegraphed by decades of privileged living. James easily sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him face first into his own car. Dad! His daughter's voice crackled through his earpiece. Mom just left the office. She's heading home. Perfect timing. James looked down at Maxwell, who was holding his bloody nose. Looks like the gang's all here, ready to record their reunion, James muttered. All cameras active. Audio crystal clear. There was a pause. Dad? His daughter's voice came through the earpiece. Make him hurt. James watched as Maxwell struggled to his feet, fumbling for his car keys in his shaking hands. Already done, sweetheart. Already done. Catherine's Honda appeared at the end of the street, just as Maxwell finally managed to open his car door. James stepped back into the shadows, wanting to see this play out naturally. The look on Catherine's face when she pulled up and found her lover bleeding in her driveway was almost worth the wait. Almost. Robert? Catherine rushed out of the car, her eyes wide. Oh my God! What happened to you? Why are you here? What happened? Maxwell's laugh was bordering on hysterical. What happened is you and your psychotic family destroyed me. Look at my accounts. Look at what they did. Catherine pulled out her phone, her face going pale as she read. These are our escape funds. Robert? Where's the money? Asked your husband. Maxwell shouted, spraying blood. Asked your precious daughter. They did this. They set us up. My husband? Catherine went pale. James is in Afghanistan. He's not due back for 2 weeks. James stepped out of the shadows. Surprise! Catherine stumbled backward, her face draining of color. James? How? When did you get back? He advanced slowly, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them. About the same time you were planning your new life in the Caymans. How's that working out for you? Maxwell tried to steady himself, blood still dripping from his nose. Now listen here, Colonel. Shut up, Robert. James didn't even glance at him. The adults are talking. James? Catherine's voice quivered as she tried to regain her composure. Whatever you think is happening, I can explain everything. Explain? James's laugh was cold enough to freeze the air. Like you explained to Patricia an hour ago? Or like Robert here explained to the board before security walked him out? Catherine's eyes darted between them, her confusion growing. The board? Robert, what is he talking about? Your wife's been busy, James said, turning to Maxwell. She's been showing those photos to some very interesting people. He turned back to Catherine. Tell me, Robert, how many of your country club wives has Patricia called so far? Maxwell slumped against his car, his voice hoarse. You sent those photos to Patricia? Actually. James smiled coldly. That was our daughter's idea. She's got quite a talent for timing, doesn't she? Our daughter. Catherine's voice rose an octave. What have you done to her? James's expression hardened. What have I done? That's rich, coming from the woman who made her watch this circus for months. Did you think she wouldn't notice? Did you think she wouldn't figure it out? She's just a child. Catherine protested. A child who's smarter than both of you combined. James shot back. Want to see what else she noticed? He pulled out his phone. The late-night meetings? The offshore accounts? The fake passports? Maxwell lurched forward, eyes wide with disbelief. You're bluffing. James read from the screen, his voice dripping with irony. Robert Maxwell and Catherine Maxwell. How romantic. Planning to start your new life together with stolen money. Tell me, Robert. James's voice was steely. Does Patricia know about the house you bought in her name? The one you were planning to sell to fund your escape? That's... Maxwell swayed on his feet, his voice trembling. That's confidential information. Not anymore. James replied, turning to Catherine. Your boyfriend's been busy. Already trying to pin everything on you, the embezzlement, the fake accounts, all of it. He paused. Want to read his emails from the last hour? Catherine spun to face Maxwell. You wouldn't. He's lying. Maxwell stammered. We're in this together, remember? Everything we planned was recorded. James finished, his voice low and biting. Every meeting. Every phone call. Every time you use her to cover your tracks? He stepped closer to Catherine. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That our daughter wouldn't tell me everything? James, please. Catherine reached out for him, her voice desperate. We can talk about this. We can work something out. He caught her wrist before she could touch him. Like you work things out in our bed while I was dodging bullets? Or like you work things out with company money while Robert here promised you paradise? Dad. His daughter's voice came through his earpiece, sharp with urgency. Mom's phone is blowing up. The board just sent her a termination notice. And oh, this is good. She continued, the satisfaction clear in her tone. The FBI just arrived at Maxwell's house. James released Catherine's wrist with a slow, deliberate movement. Right on schedule. You might want to check your email, dear. Seems your services are no longer required at the firm. Catherine fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. As she read the message, her face twisted in horror. No. No. This can't be happening. Robert, do something! But Maxwell, for all his bravado, was already backing toward his car. I need to get home. Patricia, the FBI, this is all a mistake. James stood still, his gaze cold and steady. The only mistake, he said quietly, was thinking you could take what's mine without consequences. Maxwell practically fell into his Mercedes, the engine roaring to life. He peeled out of the driveway, leaving Catherine alone in the dimming light of the evening. James, she whispered, barely able to speak through the shock. What have you done? Me? James smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. I just got home early. You're the one who's been busy. He glanced at his watch. By the way, you might want to pack a bag. When the FBI finishes with Robert's house, guess where they're headed next? Catherine's legs gave out beneath her, and she sank to the driveway, her face pale with disbelief. Our daughter. She helped you do this? She did more than help. This whole operation was her idea. James's voice softened with pride. Turns out she inherited my tactical mind and your obsession with detail. Bad combination for anyone who crosses her. Catherine's eyes welled up, but she choked on her words. I never meant to hurt her. Really? James's tone turned hard, every word laced with venom. You brought your lover into our home. You made her lie to me during our video calls. You left her alone while you played house with Robert. What exactly did you think you were doing? Headlights appeared at the end of the street, 2 cars moving quickly, purposefully toward them. Right on time, James muttered. Federal agents are very prompt, aren't they? James, please! Catherine scrambled to her feet, her voice desperate, pleading. Don't let them take me. We can fix this. We can work things out. Fix things? James took a step back as the FBI vehicles arrived. Like you fixed the company books? Or like Robert here fixed it so you'll take all the blame? An agent approached them, his badge visible. We need to ask your wife some questions. James nodded, stepping aside, the weight of everything sinking in. Of course. She's all yours. I'm sure she has plenty to say about Robert Maxwell's accounting practices. James, Catherine called as the agents started to lead her to their car. Please. Think about our daughter. I am thinking about her. His voice was icy and final. I'm thinking about every night she cried herself to sleep while you were with him. Every lie she had to tell to cover for you. Every piece of her childhood you stole from her. He watched as they pushed her into the back of their vehicle, her mascara leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Dad? His daughter's voice was soft in his ear. You okay? James waited until the FBI vehicles disappeared around the corner before he responded. You got everything recorded? Full audio and video. Everything's been uploaded to secure servers. A pause, then his daughter spoke again, a touch of awe in her voice. Maxwell just got arrested at his house. He's talking. He's telling them everything, trying to make a deal. Let him talk, James said, his voice low and emotionless. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty driveway, the place that had once felt like home, now a symbol of everything lost. The more he talks, the deeper they both sink. What happens now? James pulled out his keys, but not for the hotel. His hand landed on the keyring for their house. His house now. Now? Now we go home. There's a lot of cleaning up to do. Dad? Her voice cracked slightly, and James could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. Did we do the right thing? He thought about it. The look on Catherine's face when she realized her daughter had orchestrated her downfall, the cold rush of reality setting in. The way Maxwell had tried to bolt the moment trouble hit. Years of lies and betrayal laid bare in one breathtaking evening. The right thing? He climbed the porch steps, stepping over the shards of glass from Maxwell's bottle. No, sweetheart. We didn't do the right thing. We did the necessary thing. And we're not done yet. Because destroying their lives wasn't enough. Taking their money wasn't enough. Even sending them to prison won't be enough. They need to truly grasp what they've lost, who they've betrayed. And this is only the beginning. Hours later, at 3 a.m, James sat in his home office, surrounded by the remnants of his life, the pieces of his past now laid out in front of him. He'd spent the night rifling through drawers and cabinets, finding piece after piece of evidence that pointed back to Catherine's betrayal. Credit card statements from dinners he never attended, hotel receipts for weekends he was deployed, and anniversary gifts he never gave. The door creaked open, and his daughter padded in, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. "I thought you might need this." James accepted the mug, noticing immediately that she had made it just the way he liked it, black, no sugar. Just like Catherine had never bothered to remember. "You should be sleeping," James said, his voice hoarse. "Too wound up," she replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. She pulled her knees up to her chest, looking younger than she had in months in the dim light. "Maxwell's still talking to the FBI," she said, her voice flat. "His lawyer's trying to cut a deal, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Let him talk." James sipped the coffee, his gaze cold as he took in the situation. "The more he implicates himself, the better our civil case becomes. Already handled." She pulled out her phone. "I sent everything to Uncle Mike an hour ago. He said as your lawyer, he can file for divorce first thing in the morning. Full documentation of infidelity, financial fraud, everything." James looked at her over the rim of his mug. "You've been busy. Couldn't sleep anyway." She gave a small, knowing smile. "Besides, Mom's not the only one who knows how to work late hours." The bitterness of Catherine's excuse lingered in his chest, making his jaw tighten. "Have you heard from her?" "She tried calling twice from the FBI office. I blocked her number." Her voice hardened. "She doesn't get to play the concerned mother now." "No, she doesn't." James put his mug down and leaned back in his chair. "But this isn't over. Once the initial shock wears off, they'll start scrambling to minimize the damage. We need to be ready." His daughter nodded, pulling up more files on her phone. "Already on it. I've been tracking their emergency contacts. Maxwell's reached out to 3 different lawyers, but no one is answering his calls. Apparently, Patricia's family has some serious pull in the legal community. And Catherine? Trying to access her private accounts. The one she thought I didn't know about." A cold, victorious smile crossed her face. "Surprise, Mom. Those accounts are frozen, too." James felt a surge of pride, but there was an undercurrent of concern in his chest. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She met his gaze, her expression steady. "After everything they did? It's not about enjoyment." James stood and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The scene outside was still, but police tapes still fluttered around Maxwell's abandoned Mercedes. "It's about justice. Consequences? Same thing." She joined him at the window, both of them staring out at the scene before them. "They thought they were so clever. Playing their games. Making their plans. They never even considered someone might be watching. That's the problem with people like them," James said quietly. "They think they're the only ones capable of deception. That loyalty is something to be used, not earned." His daughter hesitated before speaking again. "Speaking of loyalty. Rita called while you were dealing with the FBI. The whole town's talking. People are choosing sides. Let them talk." James turned to face her. "You okay with that? It's going to get worse before it gets better." She straightened, her posture becoming more like a soldier's than a teenager's. "I've been handling worse for months. Besides, the people who matter already know the truth. Rita's planning to ban Maxwell from the diner." James couldn't help but smile. "Small-town justice? The best kind?" She checked her phone again. "Oh, this is interesting. Maxwell's company stock just tanked in after-hours trading. Someone leaked the FBI investigation to the financial press. Someone? James asked, his voice edged with curiosity. Anonymous source? She tried to look innocent but failed. The same anonymous source might have suggested looking into Maxwell's previous company. The one that mysteriously went bankrupt after he left with a golden parachute. James shook his head in disbelief. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Almost, she replied, her expression turning serious. There's one thing we still need to discuss. Mom's family? The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Catherine's wealthy parents had always disapproved of James, a mere soldier who'd seduced their daughter. They tried to bribe him before the wedding, offering a hefty sum to walk away. They'll try to intervene, James said grimly. Already happening, she replied. Grandma called while you were out. Said they're flying in tomorrow. She gripped her phone tighter. They think they can fix this with money. Like always. Not this time, she added, holding up her phone and showing him an email chain. See these transfers? The ones Mom helped hide? Some of that money came from their family foundation. James let out a low whistle. You're burning everyone. They chose their side years ago, she said coldly. Remember my 13th birthday? When they forgot to invite you to their country club celebration? Said it was members only? I remember, James said, the bitterness of the memory cutting through him. So do I, she replied, squaring her shoulders. They wanted a war? Fine. But they don't get to choose the battlefield. James pulled her into a hug, feeling her tremble slightly despite her brave words. You're sure about this? Once we start down this road. I'm sure. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Besides, it's too late to stop now. The evidence is already in play. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The story's breaking across financial networks. Respected businessman Robert Maxwell arrested on suspicion of massive fraud. His accomplice, trusted accountant Catherine Mitchell, in FBI custody. Anonymous sources suggesting connections to broader financial misconduct. Dad? Her voice was smaller now, uncertain. When this is all over, what then? James glanced around his office at the military honors on the walls, at the family photos he would have to take down, the life he would have to rebuild. But standing beside him was the one thing that mattered. The one piece of his family worth saving. Then we start over, he said firmly. New house, new town if you want. Anywhere you'd like to go to college? He added, feeling a mix of pride and pain in his chest. I was thinking about Annapolis, she said quietly, her voice a mix of pride and something deeper. Following your footsteps. His heart tightened. His daughter had learned the harsh realities of warfare far too young, but she had chosen to channel it into service rather than bitterness. First, James said, his voice steady, we finish this. Your grandparents arrive tomorrow. She nodded, her posture still straightening with resolve. First flight in. They'll probably head straight to their lawyers. Good. James turned back to his desk where Catherine's credit card statements were spread out, looking like evidence in a crime, because, he supposed, that's exactly what they were. Let's give them something to talk about with their legal team, because this isn't just about Catherine and Maxwell anymore. This is about everyone who enabled them. Every silent partner in their betrayal. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of what they were doing sinking in. By the time you and I are done, there won't be a single refuge left for any of them. The war's expanding, and we're just getting started. The sunrise painted James's kitchen in shades of amber as he reviewed the morning's headlines on his laptop. His daughter had been busy overnight. The news of Maxwell's arrest was everywhere, each outlet adding a new layer of scandal. Federal investigators probe multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Prominent CEO and senior accountant arrested in massive financial conspiracy. Maxwell Industries stock plummets amid leadership crisis. His phone buzzed, a text from Uncle Mike, their lawyer. Court opens in an hour. Divorce papers are ready. Want to throw the first punch? Before James could respond, the front door's security system chimed. His daughter's voice came through his earpiece. Right on schedule. Grandma and Grandpa just pulled up in their Bentley. James checked the security feed. Catherine's parents, Richard and Elizabeth Porter, were on his porch, looking like they had just stepped out of a country club brochure. Richard's golf tan contrasted sharply with his pale linen suit, and Elizabeth's pearls gleamed in the early morning light. Security cameras running? James asked. All feeds active and recording, his daughter confirmed. Want me to come home? Stay at Redis. This conversation isn't for you. Dad, that's an order. Soldier. He heard her sigh through the earpiece. Fine, but I'm watching everything. If they try anything. They're lawyers and golf players, sweetheart. I think I can handle them. The doorbell rang, its chimes somehow managing to sound imperious. James took his time walking to the door, letting them stew in the heat of the morning. When he finally opened it, Elizabeth was already speaking. James, this ridiculous situation has gone far enough. We need to. She stopped short, her eyes taking in his expression. Why are you smiling? Because I've been waiting 5 years to do this. James stepped back and gestured toward the living room. Please come in. Tell me all about how you're going to fix things. Richard puffed up like an angry rooster. Now see here, Mitchell, our daughter. Your daughter, James cut him off, is currently in FBI custody. Would you like to explain those transfers from your family foundation? Or should we wait for the federal investigators to do it? The color drained from Richard's face. What transfers? The ones Catherine helped Maxwell hide. Nearly $2 million, if I'm not mistaken. James led them into the living room, where several laptops displayed various news articles and financial records. Please sit. We have a lot to discuss. Elizabeth perched on the edge of the sofa, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her designer purse. James, surely we can handle this privately. Like civilized people. Civilized? James's laugh was cold. Like when you tried to buy me off before the wedding? Or when you convinced Catherine to set up those secret accounts, just in case her soldier husband didn't come home? Richard stopped himself, but not quickly enough. How did you? He began, but James cut him off smoothly. How did I know about that? The same way I know about everything else. James settled into his armchair, enjoying their discomfort. Your daughter wasn't as careful with her records as she thought. Neither were you. Richard's face tightened. What exactly do you want? Want? James leaned forward slightly, his voice firm and unyielding. I don't want anything from you. I'm just making sure you understand the situation. He pulled up a document on his laptop. Your foundation is already under investigation. The FBI is very interested in how charity money ended up in Maxwell's personal accounts. Elizabeth's composure cracked. We had nothing to do with that. Catherine handled all the transfers. She said it was for a new corporate philanthropy program. And you didn't bother to verify that? James's tone was laced with disbelief. Interesting. James made a show of taking notes. I'm sure the IRS will find that fascinating. Richard shot up from his seat, jabbing a finger at James. We can still contain this. Make it go away. All it takes is money. Like you tried to make me go away? James remained seated, projecting calm authority. How much was it again? $500,000 to leave Catherine alone? Tell me. Does that offer still stand? Elizabeth shot to her feet. We were protecting our daughter. No. James's voice turned to steel. You were protecting your reputation. Your social standing. Your precious family name. He stood slowly, his eyes narrowing. Well, guess what? That name is about to be dragged through every newspaper in the country. How's the country club going to feel about that? Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. Are you threatening us? Threatening? No. James's voice remained cool and controlled. I'm just telling you what's already in motion. James moved to his desk, pulling out a thick folder and setting it down. Would you like to see the evidence? Your daughter was quite thorough in her record keeping. Every transfer, every meeting, every time you helped her hide money from her soldier husband. We were building a safety net. Elizabeth protested. In case I died in combat. James's smile was razor sharp. How disappointed you must have been when I kept coming home. Dad? His daughter's voice came through his earpiece. Maxwell's lawyer just called a press conference. You're going to want to see this. James turned on the television. The news channel was already covering the scene. Maxwell stood outside the federal building, looking haggard in a wrinkled suit. Patricia was beside him, her face a mask of cold fury. I want to make a full confession. Maxwell's voice shook. I betrayed everyone. My wife, my company, my employees, but I wasn't alone. He swallowed hard before continuing. Catherine Mitchell wasn't just my accomplice. She was the architect of this entire scheme. Elizabeth gasped. Richard cursed under his breath. She approached me 3 years ago, Maxwell said, with a plan to embezzle company funds. She had everything worked out, the hidden accounts, the fake documentation, even ways to disguise charitable donations as legitimate business expenses. He looked directly into the camera. I'm deeply ashamed of my role in this crime, and I'm cooperating fully with investigators. He's lying! Elizabeth shrieked. Catherine would never. Oh, but she did. James muted the television. Your daughter learned from the best, didn't she? James's voice was cold. All those lessons about protecting yourself, keeping secrets, using people's trust against them. He turned fully toward them. Tell me, did you teach her how to fake phone logs too? Or did she figure that one out on her own? Richard's bluster finally failed him. He sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. What do you want from us? I already told you. I don't want anything. James's voice was firm. This isn't a negotiation. He walked toward the door, opening it. This is me telling you that your daughter is going to prison. Your foundation is going to be investigated. Your reputation is going to be destroyed. He smiled coldly. And there's nothing your money can do to stop it. Our granddaughter? Elizabeth tried one last time, her voice trembling. I'm thinking about her future. James replied, his voice hardening. That's why I'm making sure she never has to deal with manipulators like you again. Now get out of my house. His voice was final. Your lawyers can contact Uncle Mike about the Foundation investigation. As they slunk toward their Bentley, James watched them through narrowed eyes. 20 years of condescension, of subtle digs, and not so subtle attempts to undermine his marriage. All of it exposed as the hollow posturing of people who thought money could solve any problem. How'd it go? His daughter asked in his ear. Exactly as expected. You get everything? Full audio and video. Plus some interesting reactions when Maxwell threw Mom under the bus. She paused. Dad, there's something else you should see. Mom's asking to talk to you. James watched the Bentley disappear around the corner. No, he replied. She's saying she'll tell the whole truth about everything, but it's too late. He closed the door firmly behind him. The truth is already out there. She just wasn't smart enough to control it. James's voice was quiet but firm. Because the war wasn't just about exposing their crimes. It was about destroying the carefully constructed lies they'd built their lives around. And we're just getting started. The Federal Detention Center's interview room reminded James of the interrogation rooms he'd seen in Afghanistan. Same stark walls, same fluorescent lighting, same feeling of trapped desperation. Catherine sat across the metal table, her designer clothes replaced by a plain jumpsuit. Her perfectly maintained appearance now showed the strain of 3 days in custody. You came, she said softly, her hands folded on the table. The handcuffs gleamed under the harsh lighting. Figured I owed you one last conversation. James replied, standing firm, unwilling to give her the comfort of eye level. Make it count. How is she? Catherine's voice cracked slightly. Our daughter? You lost the right to ask about her the moment you chose him. James said coldly, his voice chilling the air between them. But since you asked, she's fine. Already applying to colleges. Annapolis is her top choice. Catherine flinched. The military? She asked, a trace of panic in her voice. James, you can't let her. Let her? James leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Like you let her carry your secrets? Let her cover for your lies? Let her watch her family fall apart while you played house with Robert? I never meant to hurt her. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. You have to believe that. Have to? James straightened up, a cold laugh escaping his lips. I don't have to believe anything you say. Neither does the FBI. By the way, how's that going? He continued. I hear Robert's been very chatty with the prosecutors. The mention of Maxwell made Catherine's face harden. He's lying about everything. Trying to save himself by destroying me. Funny how that works, isn't it? James pulled out his phone, showing her the morning's headlines. Career CEO claims accountant masterminded multi-million-dollar fraud. He smiled without warmth. Sound familiar? I can prove he's lying. Catherine leaned forward urgently. I kept records of everything. Hidden accounts, real estate deals, all of it. If you help me access my private files. You mean these files? James held up a USB drive. The ones our daughter found months ago. The ones the FBI already has. Catherine's face went pale. She knew? She knew everything. Every meeting. Every phone call. Every time you slipped away to be with him. James's voice turned to ice. While I was dodging bullets, our 16-year-old daughter was gathering evidence against her own mother. James, please. Catherine reached across the table, but he stepped back, away from her grasp. We can fix this, she said desperately. I'll tell them everything. About Robert, about my parents, about all of it. Fix this? James's laugh was bitter. Like you fixed the company books? Or like you fixed our marriage by sleeping with your boss? I'll sign whatever you want. She pressed on. The house, the accounts, full custody, it's all yours. Just help me show them Robert was behind everything. James studied her for a long moment, his gaze hard. Even now, trapped and exposed, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. Still trying to find an angle, a way out. You still don't get it, do you? He shook his head. This isn't about deals or arrangements. This is about consequences. Catherine's tears streaked her makeup as she asked, What do you want from me? An apology? James replied coldly. Fine, I'm sorry. Sorry for everything. Sorry you did it or sorry you got caught? James pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. Divorce papers. Because from where I'm standing, the only thing you regret is losing control of the situation. Catherine stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You're really going through with this? Already done. My lawyer filed first thing this morning. James's voice remained firm as he pushed the papers closer. Full divorce, citing infidelity and criminal conduct. No alimony. No shared custody. No chance of reconciliation. You can't just throw away 20 years. You threw them away. James's voice cracked like a whip. Every time you met him. Every lie you told. Every moment you made our daughter cover for you. He leaned in close, his words cutting through the silence. You want to know the best part? She suggested Annapolis herself. Said she wanted to understand honor and loyalty. Things her mother never taught her. Catherine's composure finally shattered. Sobs racked her body as she slumped over the papers. I loved you, she whispered. I swear I did. Maybe. James straightened up. But you loved his money more. His status, his lifestyle, his promises. He moved toward the door. Goodbye, Catherine. Enjoy federal prison. Wait, she called after him. What about my parents? The foundation? James paused at the door, turning to face her. You mean the foundation that helped launder Maxwell's stolen money? The one our daughter found records of? He smiled coldly. Don't worry. The IRS is handling that personally. Catherine's face fell as the weight of her actions fully set in. You're destroying everything she wishes. she whispered. No, Catherine. You destroyed everything. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. James knocked on the door to signal the guard. One last thing. Our daughter wanted me to tell you something. Catherine looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. She said thanks for the accounting lessons. They really helped her follow the money trail. The door slammed shut on Catherine's renewed sobs. In the hallway, James pulled out his phone. You get all that? He asked. Crystal clear, his daughter replied. Audio and video archived. Uncle Mike says it's perfect for the divorce proceedings. How are you holding up? She asked after a pause. I'm okay, she replied. It's weird seeing her like that, but it doesn't hurt as much as I thought it would. That's because you're stronger than she ever was. James headed for his truck, the engine humming to life. Any word from Maxwell's camp? His lawyers are pushing for a plea deal, offering to testify against Mom and the Foundation in exchange for a reduced sentence. James grunted. Let him talk. The more he says, the deeper they all sink. Dad, her voice turned serious. Grandma has been calling schools trying to sabotage my Annapolis application. Says a military academy isn't appropriate for a Porter woman. James's jaw clenched. Forward everything to Uncle Mike. If they want to play that game, we can add harassment to the Foundation investigation. Already done, she said, a smile in her voice. Also sent copies to and Jessica at the doctor. Apparently, the Porter family's social standing isn't what it used to be. James couldn't help but feel proud. His daughter had learned warfare too young, but she had learned it well. Every move calculated. Every response measured. Every strike designed for maximum impact. Meet you at Rita's? She asked. The divorce papers should be processed by now. Might be worth celebrating. On my way. James pulled onto the highway, the detention center, and Catherine now far behind in his rearview mirror. Yeah, you did good. His daughter's voice came through the earpiece. The timing, the evidence, everything. Your old man couldn't be prouder. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It had become about justice, about consequences. About making sure the world understood that actions had costs, and that no one was getting away without paying in full. 6 months later, James stood in the federal courthouse, watching as Catherine was escorted away in handcuffs. The judge's words rang through the chamber. 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. No chance of early parole. No leniency for cooperation. His daughter's painstaking work had ensured that. You okay? She asked, standing beside him in her first real business suit. At 17, she looked older than her years, seasoned by the battles they'd fought together. Better than okay. James's eyes followed Catherine as she disappeared through the secure door. How's Maxwell taking his 20-year sentence? Not well. She checked her phone. The prison gossip says he had a complete breakdown when they assigned him to regular population instead of minimum security. Keeps demanding country club privileges. James allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. And Patricia? Living well is the best revenge, his daughter said, pulling up a photo from a society page. She got everything in the divorce. The houses, the cars, even his precious Mercedes collection. Sold it all and donated the money to real charity. Not the Foundation's version, James added with a smirk. They stepped out into the bright autumn sunshine, the news cameras already waiting at the courthouse steps. They'd grown used to them now. This story was too big to ignore. Prominent CEO and senior accountant brought down by military husband and teenage daughter. The press loved the David versus Goliath angle. Mr. Mitchell! A reporter rushed forward. Any comment on your ex-wife's sentence? James kept walking, his daughter close beside him. They had already said everything through evidence and testimony. The facts had spoken for themselves. Look, his daughter said, pointing to a familiar Bentley parked across the street. Richard and Elizabeth Porter sat inside, watching the courthouse exit, one last desperate attempt to salvage their reputation. They're asking too late, she said. She pulled up another article on her phone. The IRS wrapped up their investigation of the foundation yesterday. Tax fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds, and illegal transfers. They're facing charges of their own. The Bentley began to move slowly, carrying Catherine's parents and their shattered dreams of social standing with it. James watched them drive away, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "Lunch?" he asked. "We should celebrate," she replied, her smile bright enough to light up the street. "Got my final interview with Annapolis this afternoon," she said, her voice proud. "They're particularly interested in my demonstrated leadership and investigative skills." James's chest swelled with pride. "They'd be foolish not to take you." "Oh, they're taking me," she said with confidence. "The board chairman was very impressed by my detailed analysis of financial fraud techniques. He said they need officers who can think tactically in today's battlefield." They reached James's truck, a humble, unassuming vehicle, unlike the Mercedes that had started all of this. Now that same car was just another piece of evidence in a federal warehouse somewhere. "Uncle Mike called this morning," his daughter said as they drove away from the courthouse. "The divorce is final. All assets awarded to you. Plus compensation for the money she took from your deployment pay, blood money." James growled under his breath. "We'll donate it." "Already handled," she replied with a small grin. "I set up a scholarship fund for military kids. In your name." James glanced at her, a wave of pride washing over him. She had become everything he had hoped she would be: strong, principled, and unbreakable. Catherine's betrayal had forced her to grow up too fast, but instead of breaking her, it had forged her into something extraordinary. "There's one more thing," his daughter said quietly. "Mom tried to send me a letter from prison. She asked for forgiveness and said she wanted to explain everything." "And?" James asked, his tone expectant. "I sent it back unopened," she said, her voice firm. "Marked, return to sender." She gazed out the window at the passing city. "Some things just don't deserve forgiveness." James squeezed her hand. "Are you sure about that? It's okay to feel." "What? Sad? Missing her?" She shook her head firmly. "She made her choice, Dad. Every single day, for years, she chose him over us. Over you. Over me." Her voice hardened. "Actions have consequences. Isn't that what you taught me?" They pulled into Rita's parking lot. The diner was a comforting haven after the formalities of the courthouse. Inside, the regulars nodded in recognition. They had all seen the news, knew the truth about Catherine's betrayal. Small-town justice had its own way of working. "Colonel," Rita greeted them, already placing coffee and pie at their usual booth. "Saw the news. 15 years, huh? Justice served?" James replied simply. "And Maxwell's got 20. Rita's satisfaction was evident. "Good. Never liked the way he treated my staff at that fancy club." She turned to his daughter. "You did good, honey. Showed them all what happens when you mess with the wrong family." After Rita left, his daughter pulled out her laptop, still the strategist. "We should talk about the house. The real estate agent says it'll sell fast, especially after we remodeled Mom's spaces." James hesitated. "You sure about moving? We could stay and make new memories here." His daughter looked at him, her gaze full of that sharp, tactical focus. "Dad, Annapolis is waiting. You've got that security consulting offer in Virginia." She gestured around the diner. "This town served its purpose. We won the war here. Time to move on to the next campaign." James studied her across the table, seeing not just his military bearing in her posture but also his strategic mindset in the way she planned. But there was something else there too, a fierce sense of justice. A determination to right wrongs that was all her own. "You know," he said carefully, "your mother wasn't always—" "Don't," his daughter interrupted, her voice unwavering. "Don't make excuses for her. She wasn't a victim or a pawn. She made her choice. She thought she could change. But she was too afraid to trade up to a better life." His daughter met his gaze. And she lost everything because of it. James nodded. She had earned the right to that judgment. While he had been fighting overseas, she had been fighting her own battle at home, armed only with truth and determination. So, he said, shifting topics. Virginia. A fresh start? She pulled up a map on her laptop. Good schools, strong community, no country clubs. She smiled softly. And plenty of opportunities for a retired colonel and his future naval officer daughter. James raised an eyebrow, impressed. Let's be real. You're not just heading for Annapolis, you're heading for naval intelligence. She laughed, a real, free laugh, the tension of the last few months fading away. I did learn from the best: strategy, tactics, intelligence gathering. She raised her coffee cup. To new beginnings. James clinked his cup against hers. To justice served. Because that was what it had been about. Not just revenge, but justice. Not just punishment, but consequences. They had gone up against the powerful and corrupt, armed with nothing but truth and determination, and they had won. Catherine would serve her time. Maxwell would rot in prison. The Porters would face their own reckoning. And James and his daughter would move forward, stronger from the battles they had fought together. The war was over. They had emerged victorious, and their future stretched before them, bright, full of opportunity. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.